All right. Evening, everyone. It's great to see you all back in the normal routine here. You can be seated. Hope everyone's having a pleasant evening. Just coming off of our fall conference there. Hope you're able to join us here at the Peaceful Solution headquarters. I know there's about 2 or 3 videos uploaded on the Peaceful Solution Facebook page that you can go back and watch the conference in its entirety to get the latest information and to kind of see. It gives you an idea of what is taking place throughout the world. There are many people who are a part of the Peaceful Solution who have been working with the Peaceful Solution for many years now. And you don't always get to see what they're doing. And these conferences are a great opportunity to do so. So we are going to be continuing in the respect unit. Got that for me? All right, just wanted to make sure. I appreciate it. Thank you. We're going to be continuing in the respect unit this evening, chapter 7. We're going to be picking up where William left off. And of course, William and Chris have been covering this portion for a little while here in regards to respect for our environment. And that's something that it seems like, it's been taken for granted for quite a long period of time. And now mankind, pretty much most of the global societies and even scientists who were kind of on the fence, so to speak, and a little skeptical about this issue of global warming or climate change are now kind of taking a different stance in regards to what is taking place throughout the world, right? Because the facts are pretty much undeniable. We have large glacier melts and, extreme weather events. The weather patterns that we normally have, are becoming more extreme. And one of the main factors that it continues to be attributed to is the activities of mankind. And so this is something that, we can't just brush off to the side and say, well, oh, this is cyclical. I mean, every 100 billion years, the Earth goes through an ice age, or, it goes through a volcanic age, or whatever the case might be, because the Earth's not even that old, right? There might be things on Earth that are that old. Thus, things fall to the Earth through the atmosphere continuously, but the Earth itself is not that old, right? So these changes, and if we take into consideration now, any scientists, any biologists, climatologists, they've got some other disciplines that are out there that's worked their weight in salt, they understand and they see how the activities that take place with mankind contribute to our global environment or our global health as a whole. Even dating back to the plagues and the diseases, there were big global plagues that took place in years past, and of course they always wanted to blame, the animals. It was these pesky rats, these pesky rodents, that were running around and giving people black plague and bubonic plague and things like that. No, we didn't do anything wrong. We were just living our lives normal, slaughtering each other and taking advantage of our neighbor, and leaving dead bodies laid all over the earth. Well, as was being covered in the previous class, William was talking about some of the duties, the responsibilities of these scavengers. Well, what occurs when there's too much food to eat, right? What occurs when there's just too much for the animals or the scavengers to get rid of? Well, those diseases that are in the bodies and that occur as a result of them just laying all over the place, well, they start to get into the soil, they get into the water, they get into the air, and they start to spread. And so, we've seen many things over the years, over the last several hundred or several thousand years, and they were the results of the activities of mankind. Now, the animals might have been carriers of something that mankind created, but they weren't necessarily the cause, because it was interesting. I was going back and I was looking up some you know, kind of scientific videos or documentaries, or most of it would be kind of speculative because we're not in those situations of, you know, if you tuck a specific species of animal off the earth, you know, if you got rid of something like, well, the pesky rodents, the rats, the mice, and so forth, or got rid of lobsters, as we were talking about them, or got rid of pigs, or got rid of cows, or we talked about bees and mosquitoes and wasps, you know, certain birds and so forth. If you got rid of those species in the earth, you know, something within the ecosystem would start to suffer. You know, it would start to suffer. But oddly enough, you know, thinking about all the destruction and all the things that we've built up over the years, the big, what they call concrete jungles and the cities and so forth, you know, if mankind was to disappear from the earth, well, the earth would thrive just fine. You know, there wouldn't be any wars, there wouldn't be any diseases, right? There wouldn't be any slaughtering or elimination of certain species of animals and so forth. You know, you take mankind out of the equation in that regards, and the earth would thrive just fine. You know, those animals and the macro and micro kingdoms, you know, existed beforehand anyway. But what we're trying to get out of this lesson here, and this is something that you as a teacher have to, like we say over and over, instill in the minds of your students, you know, try to drive this fact home, because your purpose in the lesson shows you that it's necessary for your student. Now, this does not mean they have to become an expert in biology or the ecology or the atmosphere or soil conservation or water, you know, chemistry or whatever, but for them to have a firm grasp on how our activities, our choices, you know, can be a benefit or it can be a detriment to the environment around us. And people don't think about, you know, throwing that wrapper on the floor, or, you know, dumping some chemical down a storm drain, or whatever the case might be. People don't take those things into consideration until years later. Remember when we talked about in this very book here about some of the consequences that can occur from some of the bad choices that we make. Sometimes they're immediate, sometimes they're delayed, okay? And a lot of what we're seeing here within the earth, within our ecosystem, as we're going to talk a little bit about here, they've been somewhat delayed, right? They've been building up over the years, activity after activity after activity. You know, you can't have a plastic island with one, you know, thank you bag in the Pacific Ocean. Just doesn't work that way, right? You can't even fill that thing up with air and float. Well, you probably could for a little bit, okay? But it's the accumulation of these things, and I don't know, and I probably find out sometime later. I probably actually have read it. It just doesn't come to mind right now. How long, you know, that particular island has been growing and building, you know, and it's caught in between currents where it's just kind of stationary there, and it's deep, you know, and wide. And it's not in an ecosystem that is beneficial for the sea life. In fact, many marine life get entangled in it, and, you know, deformities take place, and some of them actually suffer in great pain for a long time until they actually die, or, you know, they, you know, come upon some type of, you know, animal group or something like that, or they're beached or whatever the case might be. But a lot of times they suffer in silence because the ocean is a very, very, very vast place, right? The science speculates we've explored more of what's above our heads than we have what's beneath our feet, you know, in the oceans. It's a deep, dark, cold, and to some degree, mysterious place. But we know that what takes place in the ocean has a benefit for us here on the earth, with our oxygen and our carbon and the cleansing effect, you know, between, what do they call that? I was trying to think what it's called. But anyway, the cycle, the cycle of life and so forth. The distillation of the seawater, and then the evaporation of that, and then the coming down as rain on our heads. Imagine if that distillation process didn't exist. And when it rained down salty seawater, right? And you look up in the sky, a beautiful rainy day. Oh, my eyes are burning. Because the water is so, salty because it's somewhat a little bit concentrated. Well, that whole process there is there to benefit us. And then it falls on the earth, it waters your plants and your crops, and you can have clean, healthy food, should be able to have clean, healthy food that you can eat and live and then, function in society, do your job, and so forth. Well, we're talking about animals here. And just to get us back on pace, William left off here on page 188, and we're going to go back here to page lesson plan 7, page E, and we're going to look at procedure 8. And it says here, we're almost out of that one, but we'll reread it again. It says, inform students that animal life is also an important resource to respect and value. Remember, we're dealing specifically with, the main point is respect, but all the other attributes and traits and so forth that we've covered all the way up to this unit, they all tie into and support this lesson on respect. Right? Because you have to understand, in order to respect, you've got to have self-control. You have to accept certain things about, in this case, animals and the ecosystem, and so forth. Well, you might not like, they're not really slimy, but in our minds, they might be, slimy, slithering snakes, but they have a purpose. Okay? Snakes have a purpose, and, they're typically not slimy. I don't think they are, I had one experience with a snake, holding a snake one time, and he was just a little guy. He was a little guy, but in my mind, he might as well have been a 24-foot python, right? Because I don't have a affinity to snakes. But he actually, or she or whatever, fell. It got through a hole somewhere in my roof, and right when he hit a tote or something, for whatever reason it was, I knew it was a snake. I was 3 rooms away, but for some reason, I don't know if it was my snake dar was on strong that night, and so I managed to get him wrapped up in a towel, and thankfully he just crawled right into it. And I put him outside, and I said, you know what, Catan, it's now or never. So I reached up and I grabbed him by the tail, and I kind of held him like those guys hold the fish when they, take the picture when they catch the big one, And, I was looking at somebody in the window, I'm like, and I set him on the ground and I ran back in the house, very quickly. But they have a purpose, right? The snakes, like William mentioned before, they eat rodents, okay? They help to keep that population regulated, and they eat a lot of other things as well. And you also have snakes that eat other snakes, right? You have here in Texas, you have black snakes, bull snakes, king snakes, and so forth, and they actually will eat rattlesnakes and other snakes. They're very delicious to them, and I'm very thankful that they like that food, right? Cats will do the same thing, as was mentioned. Okay, they'll help to keep the snakes away. Dogs, and to some degree, they will as well, to keep the snakes. And there are also some certain dogs that will work to keep rats away. I think rat terriers are a particular species of dogs. And in fact, they had a documentary that I saw one time about how bad the rat population is in New York. Really, in New York, you could take that R and remove it and put a C in front of it, because that's about the size of the rats there, right? They actually pay a fare to get on the trains and stuff like that, because that's how big they are. But they'll have these communities of people who own these rat terriers, and they'll go out and they'll just send them out, and it's kind of a reward. It's enjoyable for the dogs, but that's what they're bred to do. And then they'll bring them back, and they'll just be these piles of just huge rats, and they'll take them and do whatever. I don't know what they do with them. And the owner said, the biggest thing about this is trying to keep the dog from eating the rat, right? Because they like it. You know, it's enjoyable to them, and most of them are trained where they don't do so. But everything has a purpose, right? Even those rats have a purpose. But you know, if they kind of get out of, overpopulated, then they can become kind of problematic. So here it says here, let's look back to procedure 8. We're on lesson plan 7, page E. Excuse me. And it says, ask students to share what they think the concept of live and let live means. Okay? And of course, accept as many answers as time permits. Now, hopefully some of your students have heard these, this, I don't want to say it's not anecdote. What do they call it when it's some type of a saying? It's, what was that? It's, what was that? Yeah, like a cliche. It's like a cliche, it's like at the tip of my tongue, and hopefully I think of it. But live and let live. Now, some of them probably have heard it from movies, right? But the concept is what we want to draw their attention to. You know, you live and you do your part in life. Let this other, in this case, animal. An animal is a broad species, a broad terminology that's used to cover a lot of different things, right? Not just cows and ducks, okay? But live and let them live. Let them do their jobs. Now, there are instances where, you might have to, take the life of an animal. And like was mentioned in the previous class, food is one of them, okay? And there are certain animals that are designed to be eaten. Certain animals are not designed to be eaten. I was looking up some of the things about lobster, and I think William was talking about crawfish and crawdads and all those things last time in the gumbo. But lobsters are in the same family of the crustacean family. Now, they say they're more related to insects than they are fish or anything like that. But there's something called vibrobacteria or some type of bacteria that you find in the lobster. Because many of you who know about lobster, one of the things that they do at restaurants is they'll actually boil them alive, right? Well, apparently after a few hours of this animal being dead, it actually puts off a bacteria that starts the decay process for the lobster. But that bacteria can actually be deadly to humans, right? Now, there's other things that can eat them, no problem. Like we talked about the pig, it can eat a lot of very, very disgusting things, no problem. Things you don't want in your environment, okay? And in the ocean, as lobsters are, lobsters are what's considered bottom feeders because they don't swim around like fish do, so their life is spent on the bottom, the floor of the ocean or wherever it is that they're living. And so everything that's trickling down from above, fish do eliminate, okay? Now, they don't use the restroom, but they do eliminate food that they chew on and so forth, bits and pieces of that, with sharks they might attack or other fish might attack. They don't get it all in their mouth. A lot of that trickles down to the bottom, and something has to eliminate it, okay? I was looking at a documentary about lobsters and how they are, in this day and age, they are considered a delicacy, right? They're considered a very expensive, sometimes upwards of $350 a pound. You can get these things at high-end restaurants, okay? But in the 16th century, they were considered the cockroach of the sea, the cockroach of the ocean. They were so abundant, they passed laws because they were feeding lobsters to prisoners for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And they were considering that cruelty, which it is, it's very cruel. And so they actually passed laws to keep that from taking place. Well, but they have a job to clean up the ocean. And like the pig has on Earth, certain things go into their bodies, and there's certain parasites. Now, you can read a biology book and you can find out things about this, like we covered previously with the trichinosis worm in the pig. Those worms are there to help to keep the pig healthy and alive and functioning, right? But when a person goes and eats that, lobster or pig or shrimp or crawdad, or I remember a buddy of mine one day someone dared him to eat a salamander. Yeah, and we were out on the camp out, and he was that wild child, and he was like, yep, gonna do it. Problem was, the salamander was still alive when he ate him. Yeah. And he said, I can feel him moving in my stomach. I was like, man, you are disgusting, But he didn't know any better, right? He didn't know. For him, it was just something to do, okay? And I don't know what that did to his body at that time, or potentially even what it did later on. All right. So let's see here. We are going to finish reading here. It says, accept as many answers as time permit. Explain that there are people who regard the lives of animals as worthless, and actually they take pleasure in torturing them. And we're going to cover a little bit of that, hopefully, if not this class, next, where the governments have had to actually move again, to set laws in place to prevent animal cruelty, to prevent animal torture, and so forth. Right? Now you think about it, if everybody was following the moral principles that are found in the peaceful solution, there'd be no need to pass other laws, right, to prevent animal cruelty and animal torture and animal neglect and so forth, because they would be respecting the lives, all life, human, plant, and animal. If you remember what we covered back here in the character unit, when we got into the three basic categories of morality. And the very first one on page 8 of the character unit is behavior and attitude towards all life, human, plant, and animal. Now, if you look on page 9 here, and this ties into what we're covering, it says at the second to last paragraph there on page 9, within our lifetime, the responsibility of our planet and its resources, and remember what William talked about last class, that our resources are something that we draw off of again and again and again. Right? Water is considered a resource. Air is considered a resource. You can't take one breath and that's it, I'm set for life. No, we have to continually draw off of air and drink water and eat food and so forth. So our planet, the responsibility to our planet and its resources will define our concern for future generations. Because if people today go about with the ideology of, it won't affect me. That'll be years down the road. Remember we talked about the radioactive barrels of radioactive waste that were dumped in the ocean or lakes, and those barrels are now, that have been there at least for 50 or so years, they're starting to leak. You put steel, in a salty environment, what occurs? It oxidizes, right? Because salt can be a strong oxidizer to steel. Well, where does iron come from? It comes from the earth. Now, you remember the picture that William showed of two environments underwater. One was a picture of the Titanic, and you saw all the barnacles and the algae and the sea life on that, right? And another was, I believe it was the Black Sea, right? Some images of ships and so forth under the Black Sea. And now, to the untrained, uneducated eye, you might look at that and go, man, that ship is squeaky clean. I'd pull that baby up, put it back on the surface as soon as I possibly can. But when you understand, how life is supposed to be in the ocean, you go, well, that Titanic one looks like it's in a lot better shape. That environment in the water looks like it's in a lot healthier shape. Iron and everything that's on that ship came from the earth, so eventually it's going to be broken down, and it might take years, it might take hundreds of years. I don't know how long it takes to break down iron and other things in that type of environment, but it'll eventually get broken back down to its original form, and a usable form that we can actually use as a resource once again. But we have to think about not only our generation and our time, but the future generations. Even if they're not directly related to us, those generations still have to live with the decisions that we as adults and even children make today on an everyday basis. So, in addition to this, we can also display a moral attitude towards animals by treating them kindly and not condoning any form of animal cruelty. Now remember, this moral relates to rules. And even though it might not be something that's necessarily written down on a piece of paper or in a book, you go to a new city, well, let me go down to the city hall and look at all your laws, that you have in place, your rules that you have in place. I don't know anybody that does that. Right? Even the people in the city governments and the state governments and the federal governments that pass the law have probably, for the most part, no idea what's in all those books. You have people who are expertly, they spend hours and days and years learning just portions of the law that they become expert in. And even that, the laws change and they vary from time to time. But just because it's not necessarily something that's written down, morality, as we're learning it from the Peaceful Solution, you can simply define it as something that doesn't bring harm to ourselves, others, or the environment. Now, that others can include and does include animals as well, because that falls into the three basic categories of morality: behavior and attitude towards all life. So, animal cruelty disregards the fact that every animal, even if we don't understand what the purpose of that animal or insect or bird or fish or reptile or whatever the case might be, even if we don't understand it, an educated person will know it has a purpose. And one of the scientists were saying about, I think they were talking a little bit about how certain animals are used in the process of laboratory experiments and so forth. And they said, because a lot of animal activists, they say, well, when these things are done to the animal, it actually, it hurts the animal, they're in pain and so forth. And the speculation is that, yeah, they do have pain and they do feel pain, but because we can't hear them say, help me, stop that, don't do that, we just assume, they're fine, right? And one of the scientists said, well, in the situation where you don't know if this is hurting the animal, then the best approach is to just not do it, okay? But like William said in the previous class, one of the big driving forces for industry is money. Money's a big driving force. And if something has to suffer, in the process of us making money, then that's a risk we're willing to take. Kind of like collateral damage when you're dealing with war. So it has a purpose that benefits mankind, the earth, and the food supply. They must be kept alive. In addition, we need to watch out for their health. And even with keeping them alive, a great majority of animals, now not all, but a great majority of animals, they don't really have a very, long lifespan. Right? Thankfully, flies are only like 3 days, thankfully, But it seems like they produce so much that it seems like they've been alive and in your house forever. That one fly, somehow he knows when you go to the laundry room and grab the fly swatter. Okay? He's out of there. But they don't have a very long life. Now, there have been some documented turtles and, certain whales and things like that have been shown to be about 100 or so years old. But generally speaking, they're made to serve a purpose, and then they go back to the earth. It says they must be kept alive. In addition, we need to watch out for their health. Every year, animals are neglected, abused, tortured, and killed for sport rather than for food. There have been numerous studies done that show that many serial killers engaged in immoral acts towards animals by torturing and dismembering them prior to murdering human beings. All right? Prior. So they get this pattern of behavior from wherever the influence comes from, established in their mind. And what it does? Remember we talked about in influences, right? How seeing continuous or repeated acts of violence, they desensitize a person. The first time you might see or you hear the sound of a bone breaking when you watch a movie, or, somebody's arm getting ripped off or something. It's like, oh, even though it's just cabbage. But, psychologically, you're hearing that and you're seeing that, and it's making an imprint in your mind. And there's also, to some degree, a little bit of an adrenaline rush, a spike in your stress hormones when you see something like that, because it's not natural to see something like that. Even watching the animals on the animal kingdom, and the lions chasing them, and you're like, come on, go, little gazelle, go, and then he finally catches them, and he's going into the gut and the belly and everything. You're like, oh. And, you don't normally see those things on a daily basis, but over a period of time, you get desensitized to it. Well, it's the same thing with the person who, dismembers and commits cruel acts towards animals. They become desensitized to seeing those types of things, and then they move on to bigger prey, which in this case is humans. So it says here, stress that no living organism. Now notice what it says there. It says organism. Okay, it includes the things that we can't see. Remember what we've covered in all the previous classes, because, and if you've been following this line of teaching and thinking with your class is going to be in tune to what you're saying, right? It's the macro, like I said, and the micro. There's so many things we can't see right now, but we depend on. I don't know what an oxygen atom looks like, right? I don't know what a hydrogen atom looks like. I don't know any of those things, but I know I need them to breathe. I know I need them to drink. I know I need them to survive. But no living organism should be treated cruelly. Imagine if microorganisms had the ability and thought like mankind does in the society that we have today, with a great lack of morality, and they retaliated against mankind. And the earth, the air decided, you know what? I don't feel like blowing in your direction today. I'm just going to stay in the upper atmosphere. Or the pigeons decided to dive bomb everybody and beak you to death, because somebody tried to kick them off the sidewalk when they were going to work, and they were frustrated and they were in a hurry, and there was just a pigeon just looking for some bread or whatever. I've seen people do that. They try to kick these pigeons off the sidewalk, and sometimes they slip and fall in the wintertime. We call them, well, in Cleveland they were crack pigeons because they seem to, get the drugs that were left over by some of the people, and they probably would attack you. But, imagine if the animals and the things in the earth actually retaliated towards mankind and treated mankind like mankind treats it. We probably look at things a little bit differently. We probably would. But they don't have that ability to do that. Okay? So it's up to us as the caretaker, so to speak, as William mentioned, the superior beings on the earth, to do our part to see to it that we're protecting everything within our environment. And it doesn't mean we have to go and put a Band-Aid on a seagull's wing because he got bit by a shark, but we do our part by practicing morality in everything that we do. Have students turn to page 188 to 191, which we're in their handbooks. And if you go back there, we're going to continue with those sections. We're actually going to, William did a great job in laying out that page 188 last class there. And just to briefly cover it, it's under all animals also deserve our appreciation and respect. Appreciation and respect. In that first paragraph, if you look more toward the middle there, third sentence, it says, animals have always been an important resource, providing us primarily with food, transportation, and clothing. And in fact, I looked it up because meat is a big staple, and a lot of different meats are eaten. Not all of them are healthy and beneficial for human consumption, but people eat it. Meat consumption worldwide average in 2021 was around 132.3 million tons. Now that was just of poultry, which is, by the way, the largest meat that's eaten worldwide, making it the most consumed type of meat globally. I'm sure you could probably guess which was number 2. Pork, that's right. And William gave a lot of information on that, which was the second most consumed meat, of course, followed by beef and veal. And of course, the top 3 consumers of meat globally are Hong Kong, USA, and Australia. So of course, they're used for these things and have been for many years, along with a lot of other different, plants and species of plants that are also used, the herbs and the spices and things like that. That helps to accent our food and the taste. There's nothing like, if you offered me nicely seasoned, deep fried chicken or boiled chicken, I'm going to choose the nicely seasoned, deep fried chicken over the boiled chicken. Now, don't get me wrong, some people might just like boiled chicken. That's fine, like boiled goose or whatever else there might be out there. But personally, I like to experience, and this is one of the things that the author even has taught in several of the seminars, try to experience the different varieties of spices and things like that. Don't just taters and beans and salt and pepper all the time, even if that's all you have, right? Like one of the, Chris was mentioning during the fall conference there, for a lot of the people in South America, where the poverty is pretty strong, rice is all they have. But like the one lady he was talking to, she, for lack of a better word, she spiced it up, right? She made it a little bit different so she wouldn't just get tired of eating the same flavor of rice every day. And so it says food primarily, transportation is another thing, and of course you deal with bigger animals in that regard, oxen, horses, mules, donkeys, even dogs, right? Dogs also in the areas where they use sled dogs to get through the snow. Reindeer are also another animal that's used. They're pretty fast, but I've never seen them hoist up reins to them. Chickens are pretty fast. I don't think they have enough horsepower, though, to pull anybody. I guess if you got enough. Hamsters, too, but they're usually just in a wheel. But they're also used for transportation. The horse actually is a common and versatile animal used for riding, pulling wagons, and trading. And if you, I'm not an equestrian, but horses I think are a pretty amazing, powerful species of animals. I've actually seen an Amish. It was an Amish farmer, I think he was, and somebody had gotten their truck and trailer stuck in the mud. They got their truck and trailer stuck in the mud, and they were kind of way out there in the country. And of course, he's, don't worry, we got you. He went and he, what do you call it? Reined up. What do you call it? Strapped up 2 of his big stud horses, and those 2 horses, just 2 of them now, walked that truck and trailer right out of that mud. Now that's true horsepower right there, right? They didn't even have to put death fluid in the horse, okay? But those, those animals have been used for years as a means of transportation. The camel is another thing. It's a desert animal that can carry heavy loads and travel long distances without water. In fact, they can go for a long period of time without water, but when they do stop at, Skinnies or wherever to get a refill, they can drink up to 40 gallons of water at one spot, right? And they can hold that. And unlike our very young men, they don't have to stop every hour to go to the bathroom. They actually keep it in their bodies for a long period of time, even though they don't store it in their hump. It's not where they store their water. That fat can actually be used to convert into energy and water, but that's not where water is stored. Reindeer is a deer-like animal that can also pull sleds, and it also provides meat and fur. A yak, I won't do the yak joke right now, but it's a mountain animal that can carry goods and people through rough terrain. Donkeys and mules, a small and sturdy animal that can be ridden or used to pull carts and plows. And even in some communities, they're still used in that regards. Here in the United States, but also in different places throughout the world. Also, an elephant, a large and strong animal that can transport people and cargo in tropical regions. Now, when I look at transport, I look at, something like a horse as just a normal animal that you would use to transport and pull things. And I look at an elephant as something like, you see these guys with these beefed up trucks and they sit like, 3 feet off the ground. That's what I see you pulling up with an elephant. Like, you big show off there, But, but they're used for that, and they're very strong. Elephants are very intelligent too. They remember for a very, very long time. It was actually something that I saw in a documentary. I don't know if someone mentioned it. One of the teachers mentioned it here too. But I think it was a woman that had abused a baby elephant. She had abused the baby elephant, and the baby elephant, I don't remember if the elephant ended up dying or whatnot, but the mother remembered that. And that elephant actually chased that woman down. I think the elephant actually killed the woman. And not only that, when the woman was having the funeral, she wasn't having the funeral, but the family was having the funeral for her. That elephant came into the place where they were having the funeral. Now, this wasn't the United States, this was another country, and started wreaking havoc there. Okay? So, think about these things. Not everything's like an elephant, but, these animals, they enjoy their life, and they're created to do a job and enjoy their life. But when mankind interferes with that, of course, it brings about consequences that, in this case with the elephant, or those things just going extinct. And it says here, clothing as well. Animals used for clothing, and there's a lot. Sheep, which produce wool that can be spun into yarn or felted. Goats, which produce cashmere. Well, I didn't know that. Mohair, which I could use, and Angora fibers. Cattle, which produce leather from their hides and hair. Rabbits, which produce Angora wool from their fur. Camelids, I don't know what a camelid is. That's a species of animal, such as alpacas, llamas, and camels, which produce soft and warm fibers. Foxes, minks, rabbits, and other fur-bearing animals which produce fur can be used for coats, hats, and accessories. Now, you've got a lot of organizations out there that don't like you using those animals for those things, those purposes, and they'll go and throw paint and things like that on there. But for years, that's what people used, because 3,000 years ago, you couldn't just go to Walmart and buy a ski jacket, right? You had to use what was in your environment. And I'm sure that the people, and you'll see this in a lot of Native American culture, right? Which is, I appreciate that. It's not only their culture, but it's one that I know of here in the United States. They teach you to value the animals. Don't just go and just kill something or slaughter something and stick it on your wall just to do that. I mean, now if you did it for food and whatever, that's fine. But I mean, they make use of the animal in its full, for food, for clothing, for rope, whatever they might need to do. And this is what we're telling. This is all ties into having respect for our environment, including the animals. And there's many other things too. In fact, one thing here, I don't want to go too far into this, but silk, which I don't have very many, a couple silk ties and so forth. But silk comes from the silkworm, and it is one of the most amazing creatures on the planet. It says, silkworms wrap themselves in a cocoon made of raw silk after they have molted at least 4 times. The silk cocoon is made of glands of the silkworm and is used for protection during the silkworm's pupal stage. All right, when it's going through the growing stage and changing into another animal. There, let's see, it says, because silk is considered one of the world's most beautiful fabrics, it is estimated that approximately 75 million pounds of raw silk are produced each year. It takes more than 3,000 cocoons. Now, we're talking something that's, not that big, a little silkworm, to make 1 pound of silk, 3,000 cocoons to make 1 pound of silk, and more than 10 billion pounds of mulberry leaves, which is their food, that's one of the things they really enjoy, to feed the silkworms that produce the silk. Now, you remember what William was talking about in the last class about, money, and the industries are a big driver for money for things that are being used, the pesticides and so forth, I don't even like to call it food, but things that people are drawing out of the oceans and using for food, or taking out of the fields and using for food, instead of letting them do their jobs. Money's a big driving force. Silkworms are significant to humans, this says, because they produce one of the world's most precious commodities, which, that's fine, silk is great, there's nothing wrong with silk. But notice here it says, because the silkworm is so precious, it is no longer found in nature. In fact, the silkworm is totally dependent on humans for reproduction. Well, why is that? The global silk market was valued at $15.6 billion in 2021, and it is projected to reach $34.1 billion by 2031. So, that's a big thing. Imagine if there were no more chickens in nature, right? That they were all in some type of laboratory or something. And that's where we got now. A lot of things, it is kind of starting to turn that way. What they have farm raised and so forth, types of fish. Salmon is a big thing. And I think there's a lot of other types of fish, bass and things like that. So you don't have them in what they call in nature, in their wild environment. And in fact, when they are sourced from the wild environment, they advertise wild caught, right? It's wild caught. Now, that doesn't indicate if they caught them in the wild or if the person who was catching them was wild. but I think it's, generally speaking, they were caught in the wild. They're farm raised, okay? And there's a lot of regulations that go with that. The way I see it, nothing is as great as what is created naturally, what we get naturally. Mankind has tried to reproduce a lot of things, and they do have 3D printing machines. I saw one where the Prime Minister of Israel was looking at a 3D, it was created at Israel, I think, there. Of course, he's got his hands full right now, but a 3D machine that actually produces fish. I don't know about it. I don't know where all that stuff's coming from, but it produces an edible fish type meal that looks and feels and tastes like fish. Never seen the ocean in its life, but that's what it is. So, if society was to continue to go in that direction, I do believe we would have to be getting most of our stuff out of some type of 3D machine, like that space age stuff. But hopefully we can turn it around. Let's look at page 189 there. Let's look back to page 188 real quick there. It says, predators like lions, bears, although dangerous, play an important role in the ecosystem. And I just wanted to remind you about that ecosystem there. By definition, an ecosystem is a biological community of interacting organisms and their physical environment. Which means everything is codependent. It's interdependent on one part of that system doing its job. In addition to this, William talked about some of the guard dogs that are trained to protect people, and they're therapeutic. They help them to feel better. People swim with the dolphins, and they don't swim with horses, but they use horses as therapy for children born with physical disabilities and so forth. And at the bottom there it says, animals also assist us by keeping the earth clean by consuming the carcasses of dead organisms and other waste. And then we talked a little bit about pigs, and we also talked about vultures. Now, vultures are pretty common pretty much anywhere you go. In Texas, you see them all the time, flying around in the air, because all the way up there, 200 or 300 feet up there, they can actually smell the carcass of an animal, and to them, it's the equivalent of us smelling a nice, juicy sirloin steak, right? Or a nice, warm cheeseburger or cheeseless burger, whatever your preference, Hopefully no male. But, you know, those things are delicious to them. And they'll come down and they'll start doing their jobs. And sometimes they'll be so much into it, they almost don't move out of the way when you're driving down the road, right? And their job is to consume and break down that animal to get it back to a usable form, right? And it's very beneficial for them. In fact, let's see if we have time. Yeah, let's, I want you to look at this video on vultures here. It's pretty interesting. It's about 4 or 5 minutes. It's video number 1 to get a little bit more idea of the benefit of these things and how they benefit the earth, not just by eating the food, but preventing certain diseases as well because of the way that their digestive systems are designed. If we could play video 1, please.
In the grasslands of Mauritania, a gazelle suffering from tuberculosis takes its last breath. Collapsing near a small pool, the animal's corpse threatens to infect the water. But for the desert's cleanup crew, this body isn't a problem, it's a feast. Weighing up to 10 kilograms and possessing a wingspan of nearly 3 meters, the lappet-faced vulture is the undisputed king of the carcass. This bird's powerful beak and strong neck easily tear through tough hide and muscle tissue, opening entry points for weaker vultures to dig in. This colossal competition is too dangerous for the tiny Egyptian vulture. With a wingspan of only 180 centimeters, this vulture migrated to Africa from his family nest in Portugal, using thermal updrafts to stay aloft for hours at a time. But upon arrival, he finds himself near the bottom of the pecking order. Fortunately, what he lacks in size he makes up for in intelligence. A short distance away, he spots an unguarded ostrich nest, full of immense but impenetrable eggs. Using a large rock, he smashes one open for a well-earned meal, though he'll circle back to the gazelle once the larger birds are gone. High above the commotion are Ruppel's griffon vultures. Soaring at an altitude of over 11,000 meters, these birds fly higher than any other animal. At this height, they can't see individual carcasses, but the sight of their fellow vultures guides them to the feeding. Their featherless heads help them regulate the sudden rise in temperature as they descend, and keep them clean as they tear into the decaying gazelle. The carcass is stripped clean in hours, well before the rotting meat infects the water supply, and the tuberculosis doesn't stand a chance at infecting the vultures. These birds have evolved the lowest gastric pH in the animal kingdom, allowing them to digest diseased carrion and waste without becoming sick. In fact, species like the mountain-dwelling bearded vulture have stomachs so acidic they can digest most bones in just 24 hours. This adaptation helps smaller vultures supplement their diet with dung, while larger vultures can consume diseased meat up to 3 days old. Their acidic stomachs protect them from living animals too. Their rancid vomit scares off most predators. These stomachs of steel are essential to removing pathogens like cholera, anthrax, and rabies from the African ecosystem. But while vultures can easily digest natural waste, man-made chemicals are another story. Diclofenac, a common veterinary drug used to treat cattle in India, is fatal to vultures. And because local religious beliefs prohibit eating beef, scavengers often consume cattle carcasses. Since the 1990s, the drug, along with threats from electricity pylons and habitat loss, has contributed to a 95% decline in the region's vulture population. In nearby Africa, poachers intentionally poison carcasses to prevent the birds' presence from alerting authorities to their location. One poisoned carcass can kill over 500 vultures. Today, more than 50% of all vulture species are in danger. In regions where vultures have gone extinct, corpses take 3 times longer to decay. These carcasses contaminate drinking water, while feral dogs and rats carry the diseases into human communities. The Asian and African vulture crisis has led to an epidemic of rabies in India. where infections kill roughly 20,000 people each year. Fortunately, some communities have already realized how important vultures are. Conservationists have successfully banned drugs like diclofenac, while other researchers are working to repopulate vulture communities through breeding programs. Some regions have even opened vulture restaurants, where farmers safely dispose of drug-free livestock. With help, vultures will be able to continue their role conserving the health of our planet, transforming death and decay into life. As with the dwindling vulture population, taking away just one important species can undermine an entire ecosystem. But what makes one system resilient and another vulnerable? Check out this video to learn how biodiversity...
All right, you see that? You know how just one species, taking one species out of the picture can affect the whole ecosystem. Now, I didn't know that about vultures. You know, they could actually break down and get rid of things like cholera and tuberculosis, and that would eventually get into the drinking water, right? But because of, and you notice the one thing that was a big contributing factor to the decline in the vulture species, 95%, right? It ties back into mankind and their activities, poisoning what they're supposed to be, not supposed to be doing, poisoning animals because they're poaching them, to not draw attention because why? If there's a carcass, well, that's what their job is to help to keep the earth clean, right? I personally would rather them do their job and eat the carcass and it not be laying all over the place than it to be rotting and that, you know, smell wafting into my camp or whatever, smelling rotten, you know, whatever type of carcass, okay? But mankind is you know, trying to hide what they're doing and poisoning the vultures, and as a result, you know, their population is dropped. And as you heard in the video, because of that, it takes a carcass on average 3 days longer to be broken down. 3 days longer to be broken down. Not that it won't, but it actually takes that longer. Now, how does that affect everything else in the ecosystem? Well, that's more time for a diseased animal to actually, its fluids to leak into the drinking water and so forth, okay? And then it can affect the whole community downstream, all because someone didn't value and appreciate, you know, the purpose of that particular animal. Well, we're going to get more into this as we move forward and hopefully pick up on page 189. Our next class, I believe, is actually going to be this coming Wednesday, so we won't have one this coming Sunday, if I'm not mistaken. The 18th, Wednesday the 18th, that's correct, right? 5:30 p.m. Central Standard Time. We'll continue in the respect unit, and we thank you all for joining us for this class, and we look forward to seeing you at the very next class. Everyone have a wonderful evening.